And we will be asking the question what transnational cyber-enabled crime means, but not just yet. First, some intros. So I am your MC for this meeting. I'm Jen Ellis. I am the founder of Next Gen Security, and I'm also a fellow of IST, and I do some of the webinars for them because I like to chat to smart people. And we have some smart people with us today, some delightful smart people. So first up, we're joined by Megan Stiffel, who is the COO of IST and the former director for international cyber policy on the US National Security Council. And she's also a former DOJ lawyer. Still a lawyer, just not at DOJ. We're also formed by another ex-DOJ person, Leonard Bailey, who is the retired former head of the cybersecurity unit at the US Department of Justice. Also with us is Jason Kipter. So I'm sorry, Jason. I know how to say your last name. Really, I just really wanted to emphasize it. He's the CTO of Automox and the former chief of cyber private sector partnerships at US Cyber Command. And I am checking to see if Alex has joined us. Nope. So we may be joined by Alex Orleans, who is head of threat intelligence at Sublime Security and an inaugural faculty member of the Alperovich Institute for Cybersecurity Studies at Johns Hopkins University. But he's been held up and he may not be able to join us, but it's okay. Fear not, because not only do we have the awesome three people I already mentioned, but we get a freebie. We got a surprise extra visitor today, and we're joined by the very delightful Nick Lyson, who heads up the cybersecurity work at IST and also has done amazing things, both as a staffer in Congress. Yes, I see your eyebrows going up there, but it's true. As a staffer in Congress, working for Congressman Langevin, and then more recently at the Office of the National Cyber Directorate, which he helped establish. So thank you guys for joining us this delightful day. We are here to talk about the Presidential Memorandum that was put out on August 12th, a mere 12 days ago. And it did not kind of come from nowhere, right? There was some build up to this. In fact, I would say that the US has sort of toyed with the idea. Congress has annually thrown out what we've been, calling a hackback bill for many years. They've never really gone anywhere. There's been a lot of debate. Generally speaking, a lot of people in the security community have not been huge fans of the concept of private sector hackback. And then in March, the White House, you may recall, put out its cyber strategy. It's President Trump's cyber strategy for America. And in it had a sort of slightly opaque statement about expecting or wanting the private sector to do more, to play a bigger role, but it wasn't very specific. And then a little bit later in March, after there'd been a response to that, a lot of speculation, the White House did actually sort of say, oh, we're not talking about letters of marque. And for those of you who don't know what letters of marque is, very briefly, it's to do with something that happened hundreds of years ago, where governments enabled ships to operate effectively as pirates, but to further their own national security aims. I'm going to tell you, since I don't want to rabbit hole on this topic, to go read up on it. There's a great Wikipedia page. Read up on it. So they put out a statement and they said it's not letters of marque. And then in July, Representative Burchett issued or put out the Cyber Letters of Marque and Reprisal Act, saying, no, we should have letters of marque, and president should be able to issue them. Now, just to be clear, this bill has not gone anywhere. It has been introduced. That's it. But then on August 12th came along the Presidential Memorandum expanding capabilities to combat transnational cyber-enabled crime. And many have responded by saying that is letters of marque, which is one of the things we're going to talk about today, whether it is or not. So really go check out the Wikipedia page if you don't know what it is. And so here we are. What we're going to talk about today is what's in the memorandum, what the implications of it can be, how people feel about it, what are some of the things to watch out for, and where is this going to go in the future. And also, I'm seeing that there is now an update on Alex, who's not very well. So I feel terrible for the fact that I've like called him out for not being here. Alex, we hope you make a swift recovery. So with all of that, I'm going to ask our friend Leonard to start off by telling us what's in the memorandum. What does it say?
Thanks, Jen. So let me start with some of the bounding concepts in the NSPM. I think there are really three to start off with. The first is that this NSPM is focused on cyber-enabled crime committed by criminals, not nation-state actors. And it specifically definitionally carves out actors who are, quote, not an institutional part of a foreign government or wholly operated under a foreign government's direction. So that means it exempts nation-state actors like the PLA or the IRGC or Russia's SVU, who've been in the headlines, but they are not covered by this NSPM. But what kind of crimes are we talking about? That's less clear. It specifically calls out fraud, predatory schemes, and cybercrime. And it is tied to an executive order 14390 that was issued in March on combating cybercrime, fraud, and predatory schemes. But really, that's about as much as we know, and there's nothing that per se limits it to those crimes. The second bounding concept is it defines cyber-enabled transnational criminal organizations, and it does so to mean a, quote, foreign group. Now, what that does not mean is that the foreign group, this foreign group could still be operating in the United States and therefore targeted by this NSPM. A foreign group could include a U.S. person. And if a foreign group uses U.S. infrastructure, it does not appear to preclude a cyber operation occurring on U.S. infrastructure. And I'd say the third larger bounding concept is that it only authorizes an operation that, an operation under the NSPM cannot result in, quote, critical outcomes, which means the loss of life or serious injury or something that rises to the level of use of force or armed attack under international law. Okay, so those are bounding principles. What type of activities does the NSPM contemplate? And again, I think there are three. The first being cyber effects operations, which includes manipulation, disruption, denial, degradation, destruction of an information system, a network, a virtual system, or information resident on those. The second type, interestingly, that it also contemplates is cyber surveillance operations, which means accessing a system without the owner's or operator's authorization for the purposes of, or primary purpose, I should say, of collecting information or intelligence. And the third activity, at least kind of gestures towards, is information sharing. There's a provision in Section 2 that says that participating companies may enter into agreements with private sector companies for cyber threat information. Now, none of these are new authorities. The NSPM can't provide new authorities that override things like the CFAA or statutes that are electronic surveillance laws. And that's kind of underscored at various points in the NSPM where it states things like these activities will be done, quote, pursuant to federal government's lawful authorities or in accordance with the Constitution and all other applicable laws and international obligations in international law. It establishes a new structure, the National Coordination Center, which will be parked in an entity that was kind of created by another executive order that was on immigration enforcement. And that NCC will have two co-directors, one appointed by the Attorney General, the other one by the Secretary of DHS. These directors can approve operations under the NSPM, but they must be approved in writing and before a company takes action. And they cannot approve an operation that will have critical outcomes. The directors will be responsible, and this is really where the guts of the program lies. They'll be responsible for creating procedures within the next 60 days from when the NSPM was published. And these procedures will cover a range of important things. They'll set minimum standards for participating companies, make sure they have technical proficiency, proven performance, expertise, proper security procedures in place. But they'll also ensure the participation of both large and small companies. They will authorize DOJ and DHS to enter into contracts with companies to perform the services that are needed, CEO and CSO. And there will be a classified annex that will provide deconfliction processes for other federal agencies, law enforcement, intelligence community, DoD, and a framework to ensure that only cyber-enabled transnational criminal organizations are targeted. Um, Now, there also is a means for addressing the quote unintentional targeting of U.S. persons and information systems within the United States, which again kind of underscores the fact that there is some potential of there being targeting of U.S. persons. Oversight is an important feature of the NSPM, and that is something that DOJ is kind of tagged with. It's directed to review activity under the program that's directed towards U.S. persons and that may implicate the Constitution or federal law or international law, and to do so to ensure that any necessary judicial or other approvals are obtained before any action is taken. Um, so, participating companies, last of all, uh, they may only act under contract and only pursuant to written approval of the directors. And specifically, under the control, oversight, and direction of the U.S. government. They will have to put up a $1 million bond in order to participate, and there is no provision in the SPM that directly addresses liability protections. And with that, I hand it back to you, Jen.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Okay, so I think the jumping off point here, like we'll start general and then we'll get more specific. So is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Is it a neutral thing? Is it too early to tell? What do you think? I see Jason smiling.
I think it's a terrible thing. I think it's all flash and no bang like everything else this administration does. And we honestly don't have time in the entire webinar to go through all the ways that this thing self-cripples and contradicts itself and all the, I'd say, poor incentives, perverse incentives that it has in it. But, like just to rattle off a few, it basically puts attribution on the companies. Like the whole attribution angle is backwards, that these private companies would have better attribution capabilities than someone like NSA is just like farcical. But I honestly, like, I'm not even worried about that part because all the stuff about below the level of war, like that's all nonsense. Like that's not real, right? Like Iran just appeared to have messed up a bunch of our water in Michigan and 12 other states, apparently, and we're going to do nothing about it, even though we're actively dropping bombs there. Like we don't actually care. No one actually cares. So pretending that people care is I don't know. It makes people feel good, but it's not real. Like there is a level where people care, but like oops, I accidentally messed up an SVR op is not it. Um, the approval gating is really, really weird, right? It's you got two political appointees who are going to, determine whether or not these things are lawful and authorized. No apparent review process, no judicial review process that, is apparent here. And then it's all going to funnel through these two guys or these two appointees, to review all these packages. Like that's not really going to be feasible. But then it also talks about automation, and like that's the thing that you shouldn't be automating. Oh, sorry, not Michigan, Minnesota. The $1 million bond. There's no civil liability shields in there. They can't give foreign criminal liability protections. It's what does $1 million do, right? Like $1 million is just like it's an entry price. Honestly, like it's worthless for both parties. So why even bother to do it? This is going to incentivize certain participants to turn customer telemetry into a targeting pipeline. Like they have to get paid for it. Cool. Like, now I have this machine going that is incentivized to find actionable things because they provide high dollar return. Like this is going to have really perverse monetization incentives behind it. And, like that I see no attempt to put controls around that or have even realized that that's a problem when I read it. The retaliation if there is retaliation, will probably be asymmetric and it'll probably land on their customers, which will probably, like you can very quickly see how this gets into a death spiral. It cites this $20 billion loss that, or sorry, there's a $20 billion loss floating around that was thrown out there by the FBI crime report. Like, are we going to spend less than $20 billion on this? Are we? Like this stuff needs to be combated. Do not get me wrong, right? When we need to think outside the box, we need to look for new approaches. Absolutely in favor of that. But like, there is no sort of like, we have this amount of loss, therefore we're going to invest this in defense and this in offense. And oh, by the way, like, have we ever looked at what cybercrime pays? Like, we're literally worried about these compounds in Southeast Asia that make so much money that they're a third of the nation's GDP in which they're hosted, which is inherently corrupting money, no matter who you are, right? Like any country, the United States would be susceptible to that. And we think that breaking their infrastructure is going to somehow disincentivize them from crime, right? Like the FBI learned a long time ago, the way that you make people stop doing bank robberies as much, right? Not stop bank robberies, but bring it down to a dull roar is you essentially make it, low profitability because tellers only have so much money. You have time controlled safes. Like the access becomes very hard to the real money. And then, I think the biggest thing for me is that I just cannot and will not get over is, Congress already declined to act on this twice in 2017 and 2019. There's no legislation in the pipeline now that's really making any traction on this front. Like, it's not like Congress doesn't know that this is a thing that can be done. They've declined to do it. So to think that an NSPM can change that with a stroke of a pen is just as false as it is in all the other instances they've tried to do it.
So there's a
Tell
lot
us
to
how you
unpack.
really feel, Jason. Um, so look, I think, the way that I would look at this is the administration says, right, in the fact sheet, they say the American private sector is the most innovative and technologically advanced in the world, which provides a critical offensive cyber advantage for the United States. By partnering with vetted US companies, we will enhance our ability to counter TCO, transnational criminal organization threats, and combat transnational cybercrime, fraud, and other predatory schemes against American citizens. And I agree wholeheartedly with the first half of that statement, right? That it's the US private sector is the most innovative and technologically advanced, and that provides us critical offensive cyber advantages. I agree. No concerns
And
there.
that didn't happen last week. Sorry.
Very true. But I think the question, and you're gonna hear some serious overtones from what Congress is contemplating on the not TCO, not the criminal side, on the nation state side, in the Senate version of the National Defense Authorization Act at the moment, is this the right way to get after that? Because historically, what we're talking about with the private sector being the most innovative, if we look at other areas of defense or areas where we're dealing with foreign threat actors, we generally look at it through the lens of the private sector provides the materiel that US forces then employ. And that is exactly what we do in the cyber domain as well. That's not new. That has been going on. So then you say, what's changing about the fact that we already make good use of the very innovative and technologically advanced private sector in what we do day to day? It seems to be that we're saying to the private sector, go off and, do the operations yourself. But then you look at all of the bureaucracy that is coming with it, because it's like, well, is there authority to do that unless it's directly at the behest of the federal government? And that's unclear. And I would welcome more thoughts on Leonard on that. And then B, you know, um, so there's sort of the authority side, and then there's the, oh, what if we go and touch stuff that the US government is already interested in? So you got all the deconfliction bureaucracy as well. And then I look at that and say, so what do we actually expect? Because it seems like we're holding two very competing ideas in our head, right? Which is like in order to actually get after these criminals and disrupt their enterprises, whether or not that would be successful, because I subscribe to a lot of the concerns Jason has about will this actually work at getting after the threat actors? But if I say, might as well try it, like, what's the harm? These are criminals, whatever else. Um, we'll try it. If I can press the I believe button on this can marginally at least increase the friction for the bad guys, why not try it? The other question though is like, once you've put all of this stuff in place to ensure that we're not ending up stepping on our law enforcement investigations, that it is under US control, then I say, well, so what are we enabling, right? Like, are we actually going to increase the velocity or anything else? Or are we just creating a lot of bureaucracy around this? And I don't really see how it can both have the controls, which makes sense to me, and I don't want some random private sector company going and blowing up DOJ's spot when they're about to make an indictment, maybe get some arrests, etc. But I also want to increase the volume. I think those are two worthy goals. I'm not sure how this NSPM is going to square that circle.
So
And if you turn one of them down, then, if we're like, well, actually, the deconfliction process is going to be very weak, or we're not going to have as much oversight. I have real concerns about what that will mean for the stability of cyberspace going forward. And if we leave all those controls in space, then it doesn't seem like there's a lot of juice to get out of this particular exercise because we have US cyber operators and, back to the NDAA question, maybe we should just be investing more in FBI cyber, for instance, instead of reassigning folks from that division to go look at, street level immigration offenses in the District of Columbia.
So Nick, I wanted to try to bridge what you were saying with what Jason was saying, because I agree with both of you 100%. As I went through this, I mean, I think actually the administration may be a victim of its own press in a way, or setting expectations. Um, it's a normal tagline to talk about the innovation of the private sector and how they're more agile than the government. And when you look through this, as you said, you've got a written approval from the NCC. You've got a deconfliction process. You've got a legal review that will run through in certain circumstances. And what you end up with is an answer to the question that I think many political folks have asked, which is, why do these things take so long? And the simple answer is to do them correctly, to avoid some of the third rails. It requires some time and effort. This is why maybe some of the operations don't happen as quickly as they could. There is another model that this approach has decided not to use, and that is one that would perhaps set priorities, have the private sector acting on its own, throwing things over the transom, at times maybe according to priorities that have been set, but not with the direct, direction of the government.
This is much more
Because,
as a mock style
yeah,
approach, right?
right. And there's also all the problems you buy by making the private sector, agents of the government, whether they want to be seen by other governments as an arm of the government, to the extent that we're at war with Iran or others, whether they want to be seen as combatants, the impact of having this position in global markets, setting aside exactly what Jason mentioned, which is the inability to extend protections under foreign civil and criminal laws. They're buying a lot of risk, without much protection. To the extent they have protections, I assume it's embedded in the fact that they must enter contracts, enter into contract with the government, because there is something under a Supreme Court case, or a couple of Supreme Court cases, that confer protection to contractors with the government. There are two different theories they won't go into because lawyer crap, but the through line in those two things is that you must act specifically according to the directions you've been given, with no discretion, which, again, going back to the agility that people talk about for the private sector is exactly not what people thought they were buying by saying, hey, we think the private sector should be more engaged here. So I'll stop there for the moment.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting point to stop at. So two things occur to me just on the last couple of points you made. One is in having a conversation the other day with another IST adjunct, Bryson Bort, who I'm sure many people listening in know. We were talking about this thing around, the points that you guys have made already about the fact that really the government isn't indemnifying you against liability, and they certainly can't do so against international reprisal or international repercussions. And large companies with lawyers are likely to say, this is not worth it for us. And Bryson's thought process here was that if he was in a large company with a lawyer saying this is not worth it for us, what he might think about doing is therefore outsourcing it to a smaller company and sort of rolling the risk downhill to hungrier companies that are perhaps a little bit less legally cautious or legally mature, and more and less risk adverse, right? And then you run the risk, and it's unclear at the moment, based on the level of detail that's in the memorandum, whether that would be doable, right? Whether that sort of subcontracting aspect would be doable in the framework they're envisioning. But you run the risk of creating this sort of this gray market that has very little oversight, and that could be massively problematic and still incurs all the risk that you guys have already talked about. The other thing that occurs to me based on the last point you made, the sort of point that you finished on, is this the US government basically outsourcing at pretty low cost? Although actually for all the bureaucracy they're incurring, pretty high cost on the bureaucracy level. The bureaucracy costs shoot up, but the operational costs come down. Is that what we're looking at here?
I would be surprised if the operational costs come down. One of the major arguments that you see in cyber policy circles about why is it that you need to go to the private sector is that the government can't pay, right? The pay is different, and so that's why the technically adept and adroit folks end up in the private sector in the first place. So contractors are expensive. Contractors working on cyber stuff are particularly expensive. So it's not clear to me that like operational costs will be all that different.
Isn't that the point? Is that like actually the private sector incurs that cost? They don't have to pay the operational people. They just have to pay a bunch of bureaucrats to manage the program, whatever that means.
But I think that, I mean, this is a question I have because, let's take the letters of marque example again. I mean, the letters of marque model had built into it a business model, right?
Right.
You got to keep the bounty when you seize the ship under the letters of marque, which isn't here. So
nope.
My question is, how much will these contracts cost the government at the end of the day, if it's going to be worth it for companies, and whether that ultimately, at that price point is going to make sense? I don't know. I'm curious. I don't know who has experience in costing out what this might run for the government, but I would expect
billions. It'll be billions.
Okay, it wouldn't be cheap. Yeah.
Well, and
there's no way.
I mean, other than a few initial ones to kind of make your mark, essentially serve as marketing. Like, no company on earth is going to do business with the U.S. federal government in a way where they don't make a profit. So, I don't know what there, sure, bill for, you can say the billing is for whatever it is, but like you can be assured that they're going to jack the rates so that 100% of their costs and profit are covered, because that's how businesses work, right? Like they would get sued by their shareholders or investors if they didn't. So it's just not real for the government to pretend otherwise.
Right. I think that the most charitable reading of this, from the standpoint of if we assume all of the oversight that is laid out, and which is relatively extensive in the black letter of the NSPM, is this is a way to quickly put dollars against stuff. So it's not going to save any money. It's just that, you will get a more flexible workforce insofar as to the extent people have the skills. I have questions about that. But like if we're going to roll the dice and say, I want to put a bunch of money against doing more offensive cyber stuff, then you're still going to need, because of all of those oversight layers, more US government employees to conduct all of that oversight. But you can probably more quickly go and find small companies, because I completely agree it's going to look like that. Again, like we seem to be going after the Chinese model right now of folks that don't have a lot of international presence. They're not multinational companies. That's who the Chinese are contracting with. Because if you're a multinational, you're like, hey, I need access to the dollar denominated economy. Like that's important to me, and my shareholders care about that. And like I have other business lines that care about dollars. If you are a very indigenous, just in China, you only sell to Chinese folks, you never really touch dollars, then it's like, okay, maybe I'll take a flyer and go work for the MSS or the PLA. That's sort of what I expect the model to be here, right? So it would be very indigenous US boutique firms. I could see you put a bunch of money, not saving us money, to be clear, but in terms of like trading some of the money for speed and saying, hey, to train up new cadres of a hollowed out FBI cyber would take a while. And maybe we can go grab them from the private sector. However, there are a couple of problems with this thesis, one of which is there is not a lot of indigenous private sector talent for hacking because it's illegal. Like you're basically talking about potentially, if you're doing it right, going to hire back formers, right? Folks from NSA or FBI or whomever, CIA, and saying, oh, we'll put the formers under contract. And there are all sorts of perverse incentive problems there about people leaving the government to go make more money to do the work. So it ends up costing you more um, over time. And it's still not clear like what the significant benefit that this is going to be over the status quo if you've got all of those same, it's like we don't see the money. I don't see the money. This could be enabling if you wanted to push a bolus of money through a way to do that faster, but I haven't seen that in the budget. I haven't seen that articulated by the administration in the context of this, of like, this is our strategy. Our strategy is we're going to put billions of dollars against this particular problem. And the only way to do it in an operationally relevant timeline of the next 12 months is to do it with contractors. I'm not sure I'd agree with that, but at least I could see where you were going with something like this. And we haven't seen that other part out of the administration yet.
I think it is important as the one token non-former US government person on this call, private sector through and through, just to note that there are lots of people in the private sector in the threat intel realm, and also people who are involved in red teaming of different varieties, who believe that they have the skills absolutely to do work in this area. And I would say on the threat intel side, there is work that can be done that is not all the way through to like what we consider to be hacking, that can still be helpful and is not currently authorized. And so I think like there is a push from elements in the security industry to be able to do that work, and I think we do have to acknowledge that. I don't want us to make it seem as if like this has come from nowhere when
but
there
the
are
work is building mission packages, right? Like mission packages, they use the term packages, cyber effects, cyber surveillance, and cyber effects operations packages, which is a DoD term. So like you cannot think of this as, if you're following the black letters of the NSPM. Like I can imagine a world where you're like, no, go use the grayish or red teaming or whatever experience you have, and it makes more sense that the private sector has it. That is not what this says. This says, go develop a mission package based on our template that's going to go through a deconfliction process, which is super familiar if you work in the United States government, and is 0% familiar if you do not. You've never done anything like that in your life. You have no idea what it looks like.
And let's talk about, just on that, there are currently authorities for things that organizations can do. right, in the cyber realm to help advance sort of deterrence and disruption of the bad guys. Those things already are covered under existing law that the organizations, for example, can do under their own assets. So like if you're an infrastructure provider of some variety, you probably have fairly large infrastructure. You can do a lot within your own infrastructure. Do we think that those authorities are already being used effectively? Like before we start giving people more authorities to go outside of their own infrastructure, do we think that the stuff they're already allowed to do is being done well?
I think ish,
Mhm.
yeah, like it's not perfect, but it's being done pretty well. And often when you look at some of those mechanisms that require USG approval or participation, like the biggest problem is just that the government takes too long to decide. Like just it's just too slow. Like nothing in this is about speeding up the decision process. It talks about what the decision process is, but it doesn't say how it's going to make it faster other than like automation, which means like they're going to be shoving the stuff through Grok and saying like, Grok, is this op legit? And like, cool, like go, knock over every bank in Bangladesh to steal funds. And oh, by the way, the most effective thing that you can do to most of these folks is take their funds. And what happens to the funds? Because the memorandum doesn't cover it. And I'm not saying this is a Qatari jet, but this is like, all the Qatari jets. Like this is, this is Boeing. Like this is huge amounts of money. In reality, especially when you're talking global scale.
And let's drill into this a little bit. So in section 3, where it's kind of talking about the implementing guidance and what the expectations are, number 1 of section 3. So there are 14 different elements of section 3 that come under this header of things that the coordinators will need to come up with on how this is going to run. But number 1 alone covers that it will establish a minimum standard for participating companies that they must meet, and it includes things like levels of technical proficiency, proven performance of cyber operations, facility security, personnel vetting, competence, reliability, and other factors that the program directors, in accordance with the Homeland Security Council, determine to be relevant, right, or necessary. I am not aware of a scheme anywhere really that effectively does a good job of managing oversight of entities for that list of things. And I am trying to understand how that would work in practice and be good enough to then give people like carte blanche to go do stuff.
So on that, I'm curious. I mean, I don't have an answer. Maybe someone else does on how well vetted this NSPM was through the government, so that like maybe some of people's expertise about exactly questions like that were fed into it at the outset. I also though do want to go back to one point, the question about how well people are using their authorities now, because I think this is the point I don't want to be missed, and I think it is. I feel
like Jason's got a bit of confidence that I don't share on that. I'll say.
Okay. Well, that like there are two different, the path of making private actors your agent or having them act independently and cooperate with them and coordinate with them. The one thing that is, I think, lost here, if you go this route, and again, I'm not sure that there's an easy answer because there are also shortcomings to the other route, but to the extent that people are doing things to protect themselves, there are things like the rights of property exception under the Wiretap Act and the Stored Communications Act that will allow you to share information or to collect information to protect yourselves that might be implicated in these types of operations. You don't get those if you're acting on behalf of the government. You lose some of those authorities when you're acting as a proxy for the government, because they were intended to allow providers acting as providers to protect themselves, not to circumvent the Fourth Amendment or other protections. And so to the extent that we're now kind of turning these private sector actors into government actors, there are consequences. And some of those consequences mean that we lose some of the things that people talk about in terms of agility, like when, and I think particularly large providers could be very helpful at scale in dealing with a lot of the malicious cyber activity that we see. They see it on their networks. They have authorities right now under, places like CISA 2015 to take certain actions authorized. But as an example, those actions under CISA 2015 may not be authorized because CISA 2015 applies to non-federal entities. And it was intended to authorize non-federal entities to act. There was no interest in giving the government new authority under CISA 2015. And so if, again, you're converting these private actors into government actors, there are things like CISA 2015 that's no longer arguably available as an authority. So anyway, I didn't want that point to be missed because I do think this is a difficult question of like which route you go, but there are consequences to that decision.
I just want to clarify that when I say I want to make sure my pessimism is fully captured. The authorities that we have today that we use today are largely sufficient for the levels of operations that our private sector is capable of executing.
Yes. Agreed.
Again, I go back to one, like none of this, like if you wanted to knock this stuff down faster, whether it's this thing or Section 1604 of the NDAA, state, non-state, don't really care. Like the biggest problem is, the government like cannot make a timely decision and, drives out talent like it's paid to do so. And like that's the actual problem, right? And it's not that it doesn't have talent, it's not that it doesn't develop talent. Like it's actually much better at than people give it credit for, but it's the matter of like they drive talent away and they can't. And I'll tell you, a lot of the talent actually goes because the government can't make a damn decision in a timely manner. So this does not alleviate that. It doesn't attempt to address it. It just pretends like it's fine. The other bigger problem I go back to is our companies, even if we let them go nuts, are not going to be able to make meaningful progress against this problem. And there's really two reasons why. One is that, the cyber on cyber thing, among Keith Alexander's many failings as a person and a leader of NSA and his post-military career, like this whole thing about our archers and their archers and the arrows crossing the air and like all the tips are going to line up and like that like farcical nonsense like has poisoned people's brains that the best answer to an offensive thing done in cyberspace is another offensive thing done in cyberspace, and like that's just really never been true, right? And I'll tell you why. Like we already have proof. Why hasn't China done this? Right? Is China lacking on government capacity? Is China lacking on contractor capacity? Is China lacking on their willingness to do like completely unhinged, untargeted, indiscriminate operations at scale? No, they have no problem with doing effects, with setting up for effects. Like they don't care. They literally don't care. But these scam compounds in Southeast Asia that are holding their citizens hostage are such a problem that they've done what? 2-3 cross-border raids now, like actual special forces sent in to shoot people in the face and extract their citizens. But we're going to just assume that they haven't tried applying their cyber forces to this problem to like, hey, computer guy, make another computer guy problem go away. Like that's, I think that we really ought to have some deep-seated questions around that. And that'd probably be a really fantastic RFI for the intelligence community. And I guarantee you it doesn't exist because, people don't have the imagination to ask questions like that of like, is someone else doing this thing? Like, what would happen with this, right? It's the whole thing with like, I'm not going to go on for rant of Volt Typhoon, but I think Volt Typhoon is the greatest, most counterproductive thing that China ever did. And we should absolutely encourage it more because it's an idiot operation. And I love them for it. Like, keep doing that. Like, if you want to guarantee us to intervene in Taiwan, please shut off the power and see what happens next, right? Because we don't care today, but that'll make us care. So, like, they're doing cross-border raids, but they've never attempted to take their massive, oversized, largest cyber predator on the planet and try to like knock over a few criminal compounds and disrupt their Starlink stuff. Like never take their funds, never. I think they probably have. And I think it's probably been somewhat ineffective because sometimes the best thing to do is, you send in a raid. Sometimes the best thing to do what's the best thing to do for ransomware actors? Put him in cuffs, right? Put him in cuffs. Get the idiot to take a vacation and you put him in cuffs. And
Just for
you
the
know,
record, I'm just glad that this wasn't the shoot him in the face cyber
no, I'm
NSPM.
not a fan of the
Yeah, I
shoot 'em
mean,
in. I
you
am
have
not
to.
a fan of like, T-lambs for data. That's not how I roll. But like, I mean, if they're holding your citizens hostage,
Yeah, it's different.
right? Like that is a
I
different
am
thing.
recalling though the
Yeah, you
phrase
stole
that
my
you.
Bitcoin. Like, we don't need to start droning people for that. Please no. Right. But we do have effective means to deal with them. Well, semi-effective means. And like, I think that's part of the problem is like, this is another like stunning lack of imagination, um, where, like, oh, we can't figure this out. We'll shift it to somebody that we hope can figure it out, right? Like it's kicking the can. It's kicking the can and making it sound like you're
I
doing
agree.
something and you're doing something tough. And like we've experimented with this crap before, right? The Pinkertons, Blackwater.
Again.
Oh, this is kind of fuzzy for government, a gray line. We don't have enough capacity, and we'll bring in the power of the public sector. And it turned out not so great. So why? In our, in any form of rational thought, will we assume that in something that is obviously like poorly written, poorly constructed, loosely controlled, like this thing has less pages than the Marine Corps manual on grooming standards, right? Like hair, makeup, trimming your
Which, by the way, is
mustache,
a
like
very personal topic for Jason.
yeah, like I mean,
Right.
come on. Like this is garbage. This is hot garbage. Like it's pathetically sad. Like if this was legislation, it would be 10x this size, right? If this was turned into it was like, hey, DOD, turn this into a memo to implement it, like this thing would be books full of regulations and appendices and everything else. And it's like, what do we get? Like, 10 pages double spaced of the unclass. And I guarantee, I'm going to tell you right now, that classified version is probably 3 to 5 pages. And it mostly says, like, don't do these things in these countries unless you do this stuff. Like, it's not going to be like, if you think, ladies and gentlemen of the public, if you think the classified annex is going to save us from stupidity, I am here to tell you it absolutely is not. Like, if anything, it's probably going to be like even more demoralizing.
Okay,
So-
so we have 9 minutes left. So I'm sorry. I'm gonna wrestle this back from you guys because I want to hit some very specific points. So one, Lennon in his original layup said it was unclear specifically what this covers, what is meant by transnational cyber-enabled crime. I want a very quick answer on this. What are the kinds of crime we could be talking about here? Like, we're talking about things like fraud and ransomware, and that's what I would interpret it to mean. But what are some of the things that we don't think it should mean, but it could mean?
I mean, I think it's going to be business email compromise, ransomware, data extortion, what do they call it? Yeah, pig butchering, which we used to, is kind of just an evolved thing of the romance scams. I think those are going to be the big ones.
Do we think there's anything that we like? That's the stuff that I would expect it to mean, but other things that we think we wouldn't expect it to mean.
So look, I'm as a lawyer, I'm in the art of the horrible, right? You
Right.
kind of imagine
Yes.
what are the worst case scenarios, and sure, I mean, there. I've talked to people who are very concerned about, given the highly politicized, partisan nature of the world we live in, and how some of the authorities at DOJ are being used, whether this type of thing would be pointed towards what would be, badged as a foreign group attempting to influence the U.S. in some way politically, and therefore allowing for surveillance or cyber operations. Can I rule that out? I can't on the page. I would hope that like rational minds would prevail, and that isn't where this type of thing would go. But you know, the only thing that makes me comfortable there is this would all still have to be done under existing law, right? So it's not like someone could spin up a wiretap just because someone at the NCC said go do this. It specifically references the need to go and get the requisite legal, authority to do those things. So, yeah, I mean, those concerns are there, but let's hope it's bounded.
So I'll disagree with you slightly, Leonard, in that it seems like there's a whole lot of stuff in here that's not authorized under the law already. And so I am not optimistic that saying like, well, but surveillance of domestic folks, like that will suddenly be a problem because there's no authority to do that. Like, I don't believe that, right? Like, there's no authority for them to just say, to just waiver away CFA violations in this manner. And that doesn't, like, they have no authority from Congress to do this. So why would that be a thing? Like, this doesn't actually protect U.S. citizens. There's no protection for U.S. citizens in here except against inadvertent targeting. Intentional targeting, authorized. It's authorized,
Yeah.
right?
Receives
And it
any
has to have,
necessary authorization, judicial or otherwise, prior to the approval of the operations.
it says
Yeah.
what?
That's procedures for the review by the Department of Justice that ensures that any program activity that is directed at a United States person or otherwise implicates the United States government's obligations, receives any, this is where I had a heart attack, receives any necessary authorization, judicial or otherwise. Well, first of all, the president can't direct in most cases, in most surviving democracies, the executive branch can't tell the judicial branch what to do. But here we are. Anyways, the thing that gives me pause here, and Leonard is more recent in this than I am, but it almost suggests that the president is directing DOJ's activities again, receives any necessary authorizations. Like, so does the AG just stamp it? Okay, it's targeting a TCO stamp, like did FISA, it wasn't a rubber stamp.
Right. Look, if we're in, I mean, yes, if we go into crazy town, and there are concerns that there have been, so there's a sort of choose your adventure approach to the legal theory that has been used at moments. But assuming that we're still in the land of rule of law, and I don't know if I can hear some giggling off of the chat room, but if we're still in that room, I have to believe that the words on the paper will mean the words on the paper. I've been wrong before, though.
I
Okay.
want to believe it. The fact that
I'm
it's
going to
even
jump
a
in.
question.
I'm sorry. We've got 2 questions, so I really want to get to them before we run out of time. We've got 4 minutes left. Sorry. But you have more than answered my question. Thank you. Okay, so question 1 is, would this make more sense for this to only be enabled if the originating cyber operation qualified as a critical outcome as defined in the memo? I think it would make a lot less sense, but I'm interested in what you guys think. But again, I'm going to give you no more than 2 minutes to answer this question across all of you. So be quick. So do you want me to read the question again? Would it make more sense for this to only be enabled if the originating cyber operation qualified as a critical outcome as defined in the memo?
Yeah, so I mean, my interpretation of the question is basically saying if the shadow boxing around infrastructure that this really seems to be contemplating is not going to be sufficient to cause the Laotian folks to stop their scam compounds, shouldn't we just flip it around and say, no, let's just take advantage for the use of force stuff? And I would say like that, I could see that as a strategy. Again, I'm back to what the heck does this have to do with the private sector, right? Like that remains the part that is baffling to me is you can have these conversations for, weeks about what's the most effective way to deal with cyber-enabled fraud or cyber-enabled crime in general. I got lots of thoughts. There's lots that we could do. What's the private sector role here? And if you say it's critical effects operations, if that's what we decide is the strategy, that's how we're going to get them to stop, is we need to do things that look more like that. Which again, I have reservations about, but I think it's an open policy question. You can debate it. Saying that the private sector should be involved seems nuts. Like that part, I think, is kind of what are we talking about? If you're going to move to that level, use the military. Congress authorized. One thing that I think is lost is Congress authorized in the 118th Congress, I don't remember what year, the use of cybercom authorities against specifically Mexican, transnational criminal organizations. Like cybercom has a blanket AUMF for cyber operations against Mexican cartels, effectively. And not a lot of people paid attention to that. It makes me very nervous. It is just an open authorization for the use of military force. That sort of sounds like critical effects stuff. But the private sector is nowhere to be seen. And like, I think that should remain the case.
Okay. Thank you. Sean's question is, can of worms here, but could DOJ provide authorization for otherwise illegal activity for private sector entities engaging in some of these contemplated activities under the NSPM? So could DOJ provide authorization for otherwise illegal activity for private sector entities? And I feel like this is a much longer conversation than we can cover in the time that we've got. So what I'm going to suggest is that maybe that is an offline conversation unless somebody wants to give me a really quick answer.
I can give a quick answer.
Yeah.
Yes, it would not help, though, in a number of cases. For example, for civil liability, the Department of Justice can't nullify a criminal statute like the surveillance statute, for example. So it could do that for investigative purposes, but there would still be a question about some residual liability in some circumstances.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to ask, so for our panelists right at the end, so I would like you to show me a thumbs up, a thumbs across for neutral, or a thumbs down as this is your vote overall on this memo. Sentiment vote. I see one thumbs down, another thumbs down, another thumbs down, and I can't see Nick for some reason. Okay. Now, I'm going to answer the same thing very quickly. Should the private sector be involved in cyber defense in some way?
Yes, we said that back with the ransomware task force in 2021, and people have been saying it for years. And some organizations like Microsoft and Google have figured out how to do it. What we need to do is figure out what works now and scale it. And this is not the way to do it.
Okay. Will this policy meet its goal? Thumb up, thumb down?
No.
Okay. And then the last one is, are they going to run a consultation? Is there going to be a way for people to get involved and give their opinion on this? And should people be communicating proactively, trying to give an opinion on this and trying to shape where this is going? All right. Thank you for your thumbs. I appreciate them. Thank you to our audience for sticking with us. I'm sorry that we've run very slightly over. And thank you to the IST team for hosting as you.